this isn't a very pleasant topic, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about debasement. I bet you don't think about that word that much. And the only reason I did is because it's part of a test that psychologists use. The test is called the MCMI, and that's neither here nor there. But I was sitting there working with it, and I sat with that word, debasement. And it was a strange aha moment for me. And how I thought about people in narcissistic relationships, because I hadn't thought of that word and connected those two things. Now, if you have ever been in a narcissistic relationship, particularly a relationship with a vulnerable, communal, self-righteous, or malignant narcissistic relationship, basically all of them except grandiose, you have engaged in debasement. And the debasement is a source of the shame and the self-blame that people in narcissistic relationships experience. Debasement is defined by Merriam-Webster as the act or process of lowering oneself in status, esteem, quality, or character. In simple terms, debasement is putting yourself down, but like really putting yourself down in really, really inherent, integral ways. Like you characterize yourself as a bad, weak, incompetent, or damaged person. There are different ways we can use this word or view this, because debasement can also relate to behavior. She debased herself when she took that low-level job despite having a college degree from such a great school. He debased himself when he married that horrible grifter woman. She debased herself when she took on all the blame for what her boss did in hopes that it would protect the organization down the road. Debasement can happen through our words, our actions, and some people may make presumptions about us debasing ourselves fairly or unfairly, may view you as when you spend time with marginal people or working in a job that was humiliating, given that you were capable of more, right? That you may not have set out to debase yourself, but it may be how you viewed yourself, right? Debasement can be observed by other people. You say, oh, she talks about herself in such a debased way, always humiliating herself and spending time with people who treat her so badly. In that case, the so-called debased person may not saying, I am going to debase myself, but it looks like that from the outside, right? Sometimes it's a bit more intentional, and that is what can happen in a narcissistic relationship. Let's talk a little bit about that. Debasement can be the lowering of standards, lowering of our own standards, where you work, what you do at your job, dropping the standards of a business, having to be having to stay in a humiliating relationship, perhaps recognizing that at a lonely time in your life, you maintained an intimate relationship with someone who shamed you because you thought you didn't deserve better. It can be the politicians or celebrity or the business wife who stands at the spouse's side after the spouse was caught in a scandal. That can look like debasement. The definition of debasement in psychology is to lower oneself in status, esteem, quality, or character, right? It's the psychological equivalent of putting your own face in the mud. It is just one step short of degradation. You may wonder who would do that. Well, the only way a narcissistic relationship works, frankly, is if we debase ourselves and basically bring ourselves down. It's how these relationships work. Narcissistic people pummel, maybe not literally pummel and punch you, but they just keep boom, boom, boom. You did this, you did that, me, my reality, my reality, my reality. Did you say that? Did you not say that? Did you use that word? Did you not use that word? You said that, you said that, you said that, you did that, you did that, you did that, ba-ba, 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 ba-ba. Because of their pathological hypersensitivity, and they have the audacity to call everyone else sensitive. One misplaced sentence, and we pay for it for a long time. There's also something even more perverse at play. Your debasement is almost gratifying for them. You sharing all that is bad about you and damaged about you and twisted about you and that you were wrong, said it wrong, and remembered it wrong. In essence, it's an unfortunate, like getting in line, getting into line or synchrony with their gaslighting. When we debase ourselves with the narcissist, it almost leads to a visible release of tension for them. They look gratified. It's disgusting, but you both physically and intellectually realize that this relationship works when you debase. But because it can be a messy, tangled stew of fawn responses and our own distorted self-schemas and identities that we have always had, it's tough to see where the debasement begins and the rest of that stuff ends. But I'm hoping that after this video, all this becomes a little bit more clear. Vulnerable narcissistic folks, they kind of like the debasement of others because it allows their already sensitive, victimized selves to feel vindicated and get some of that power that they so desperately crave, but often don't have in the traditional ways we see in narcissistic relationships. The malignant narcissistic folks like your debasement because it keeps you humiliated and them in power. The communal narcissistic folks like your debasement because they like to pretend it is your humility and shame, and then they can be the cure and rescue you and make you feel better about yourself. Culty gurus do this all the time. The self-righteous narcissistic people like your debasement because they get their power by spouting nonsense like pride goeth before a fall. And it's a way to keep you in your place and them in their judgmental space of rightness. The reasons we may start down the debasement highway and may not even be aware we're doing it are to maintain attachments and stay close, because sadly, debasement is a way to be able to maintain a narcissistic relationships, to break the tension, perhaps to avoid abandonment. And once we realize it works, we may do it. And if it is something we learned and were rewarded for in childhood, it becomes painfully reflexive to debase ourselves. It becomes the sad, painful language of the relationship. We debase, their tension releases, and everyone gets along. And if we do it enough, then it becomes automatic. The problem is, if we do it enough, it also becomes who we are. The reflexive, I'm stupid, I'm damaged, I'm gross, I'm disgusting, I'm worthless, I don't know anything, I'm second class, I'm second rate, I'm incompetent, I'm nothing. And if you say something enough to yourself, it starts to seep into the groundwater of your identity, and it becomes you. The words you use to survive and navigate one of these relationships become you. The debasement may also be the only way to draw forth any form of soothing from the narcissistic person. You may find that when you talk about yourself as though you are garbage, the narcissistic person will take on a more soothing, oh, there, no, you aren't, I love you so much. The sick cycle becomes, put your face in the mud, and then you get to hear that they love you. That's debasement. And you know I never dropped the F-bomb, but here we go. It's fucked up. Remember the primary motivation of the narcissistic person in a relationship. The narcissistic person gets their sense of safety from power, domination, and control to offset their insecurity. And as I keep saying, these relationships have to be imbalanced. They have to be asymmetric. The narcissistic person has to be the great one, the one in charge, the one who knows more, the one who is the biggest victim, the one who is seen as great, the one who is seen as special. It's the only way that it works. The debasement dynamic means that for all the reasons we get attached and invested in a relationship and want it to last, we get lost in the pas de deux, the dance of keeping this relationship working. And that is debasement. Back in the 1950s, the women's magazines would yammer on and on about how wives could make their men feel like men. And while they weren't quite advocating for debasement, kind of they were, but they weren't saying that in as many words, it was all about making the man feel like a king, telling the woman, dress up and keep the house clean and always be smiling and keep the kids tidy and out of the way and put the dinner on the table. And if you don't do those things, then it's your fault they aren't nice to you. And the women were supposed to do all of this despite having lost their identities and any sense of meaning and purpose to these marriages, and often enduring emotional abuse or other forms of abuse. So prescriptive debasement has been a thing for a long time to keep unhealthy, asymmetric relationships propped up. Debasement may also show up in a sort of debasement by proxy, and it gets really dark here. You will find that when you debase other people that are your actual supports or are close to you, for example, family members you may care about or friends or coworkers, that debasing other people will get you as much juice, perhaps even more, out of that narcissistic attachment orange as debasing yourself. Saying things to the narcissist like, I know my sister's a complete bitch, I can see that so clearly, or you're right, that guy I work with is a complete hustler and charlatan, or yeah, Jenny is a snake, and on top of that, she's incompetent, or yep, my mother has been trying to get us to break up. She is a manipulative monster. If you debase your supports, then the narcissistic person gets 2 for the price of 1, maybe even 3. To them, it shows that your judgment in friends or your family sucks. It distances you from supports. And the narcissistic person will remind you forever about what you said about that friend or family member or coworker, and better yet, they may even tell that person. That's that betrayal piece we talk about. And then if all of this isn't already terrible enough, you feel a sense of moral injury that you carry within you for debasing someone you actually love and care about in the name of throwing chum and meat to gratify the narcissistic person. You may debase these other people to the narcissist because sadly, you strategically learn that this is how you can actually keep the narcissistic person in your life, or at least keep them calm. Things like, I know my sister's a world-class loser and a mooch, and she's screwed up again, and she needs a place to live for a few weeks, and I know she's a loser. By saying it that way, though, you may get a yes from the narcissist. You have to debase your sister to give her a place to live. Narcissistic people often feel competitive with the other people in your life. Debase them, and that tension breaks. It's absolutely awful. But as you have to navigate the balance between losing your supports or having people you care about, but having to debase them to get the narcissistic person's buy-in, is one more example of how much we have to give up for these relationships. And once again, multiple debasements about people you care about. Hear something enough, and you start to believe yourself. And slowly, you may find yourself becoming more isolated no matter what you do. The debasement is how we maintain that asymmetric positioning of the narcissistic relationship. We keep saying we're bad, we're flawed, we're damaged, we're foolish, we're wrong, and that they're right. And with that pressure valve opened, the relationship works, whatever the hell that means. Maybe it means that we don't have to dismantle it. Maybe it means you buy another year. Maybe it means you don't have to go through the discomfort of addressing the trauma bonds. And it isn't always active. It's not always us actively putting ourselves down. But it's also the loss of self-advocacy. Again, it's kind of tricky. How much of our not responding to the narcissistic person is just good common sense because there's no point in engaging, and how much of it is the trauma response of submitting, and how much of it is the why bother? Perhaps the slowly indoctrinated belief that maybe I am as selfish as they say, as terrible, as damaged, as awful. So why would I fight back? The debasement is to stand in the face of their beliefs about us and recognize that this works as long as I stay silent in the narcissistic person's conviction that I am below them. The so-called passive debasement is more of sort of a submit trauma response in my book. But to the degree we also say, why bother? Maybe it's true. Who else would want me? I can't get out of this anyhow. It's easier to not say anything. It may also be part of this debasement model. Now, sadly, the debasement also starts to be something that allows the cognitive dissonance to be relieved. We say we are these bad things. We agree with things that aren't true about us, but the tension of the relationship starts to fade. Listen, I fully understand that debasement feels like a way to make the narcissistic relationship sustain for a period of time. But to debase ourselves, it's not good for us. But it's a quick and dirty way to just kind of keep this relationship rolling in whatever way it needs to. But it keeps us really stuck. It cements self-blame. It makes it harder to leave or disengage, and we believe it after a while. As a world-class debaser myself, when I enter healthy spaces where I am not being debased, it's still a thing in several of the toxic relationships I do have to maintain. But when I'm not being debased and I'm not having to bow down and eat shit to maintain a relationship, and I'm actually being taken seriously and I can fully be myself, I sometimes am in the relationship and I sort of squint as though an alien spaceship landed in my backyard and the aliens are coming to my door with a plate of brownies and a welcome basket. It's as though a bright light is being shown in my face. That's how I look, perplexed. That's how many survivors look. When we step out of relationships where debasement is the only permissible dance step, it's hard to learn new moves. I have one dear friend who does not let me debase myself. Bless her. She stops me every single time. In a way, being with her is like someone opening the windows and letting out the smoke. I can see, I can breathe, and my eyes no longer sting. But it's got to be a little exhausting for her, too. The debasement dance often starts in childhood. I'm sorry, Mommy, for being such a bad girl, for being such a bad boy, for being such a bad kid. I'm sorry. I know I'm bad. No kid should ever have to say that. Narcissistic parents actually like debasement because narcissistic parents often expect gratitude and almost feel entitled to perfect kids. When the kids have any kind of demand or behave like kids, then debasement is how the child is quickly able to create attachment again. The child with eyes down, I'm sorry for being so bad and awful. And then the soothing coos of the parent, there, darling, it's okay. Now don't do that to me again. It's all very personal in the narcissistic relationship. Everything is being done to them. When it's bad, it's never about them, and it's all about you. You did the bad thing. For a child, this dynamic is lethal. The narcissistic parent is not able to focus on behaviors. It's not, come on now, we don't throw the ball in the house. That's why the juice got spilled. Let's clean that up. Versus, you're such a bad kid. How could you do this to me? In the first, it's about the behavior, throwing the ball and the juice glass getting spilled. In the second, it's about the kid being damaged. Narcissistic parents will often view the child's bad behavior as being a personal attack on the narcissistic parent, and the child will learn that they quickly have to pivot, often to debasement. Again, it is part of that whole fawn response kind of thing, but they have to do this to remain connected to the parent. That kind of self-talk can persist for a lifetime. In adult relationships, it becomes clear that the debasement is the pressure valve that releases the tension. Ultimately, debasement, as I said, is a capitulation to the gaslight. Yes, I am all the terrible things you say. I said and did all the terrible things you said. It's the slow cult-like indoctrination into their reality. And cults frankly count on debasement as a recruitment and retention tool. The members debase, and then the cult leader gets to rescue them and tell them how they are beautiful and special if they do exactly what the cult leader says. It's powerful stuff, and sadly, it works. When debasement becomes the primary language of attachment, it's a harmful relationship. There is really no steering the ship right then. It is a confirmation of the power imbalance that can't be fixed. It fulfills the narcissistic need. And since narcissistic people really don't have tons of empathy, or it's kind of all over the place, they don't care that all of this is harmful to you. It creates that persecutor-rescuer complex that is so dangerous in these relationships. They pull you into the gaslighted storm, you debase yourself, and then they feel better and they comfort you. Then they feel like they care about you, and you feel like they care about you, and the relationship persists. Debasement is also what makes healing so difficult. That debasement language lasts for a long time, years, sometimes decades after the narcissistic relationship ends. I have worked with survivors 10 years out whose go-to is, I'm a loser, I'm an asshole, I'm gross, I did those bad things, I was selfish for wanting that stuff, wasn't I? When I help people through healing, it really does feel like deprogramming, and it takes a minute. My hope is that people get to that point that when they are in non-debased spaces, that they don't always just squint and feel that they're looking at brownie-bearing aliens. It's a process. And as a long-term survivor myself, as I said, I still debase in relationships. I still do it reflexively. And heaven bless the spaces in my life where I don't have to do it. They feel precious. And my only hope for all survivors is you all have those. And a last bit of debasement trivia. Another definition of debasement that we don't think of in the psychological or person space is when you take precious metals, for example, in a coin, and you start mixing the precious metal with a less valuable one to create coins more economically. But then the overall coin, the physical coin, loses its actual value, though the intrinsic value is the same. A penny is still worth 1 cent. And that sort of captures what happens to us in narcissistic relationships. Your precious, high-quality, golden you feels less valuable because of the cheaper stuff that comes from the narcissistic person and relationship. Your precious metals get mixed up with the rusty crap of a narcissistic relationship. And we can spend a long time in that devalued space, but unlike a coin, your actual value doesn't drop. It's still there. But sadly, we have to devalue ourselves for the relationship to work, and that transaction is never worth it. Healing is pulling that gold back up out of you. That even though, again, debasement being that the sullying of the precious metal so it can be used and be cheaper to create, we may feel that, but you're still 100% that pure precious stuff. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to mix it up with the bad stuff to make these relationships work. Thanks again.